Welcome to Infidelity Diaries. Explore the secrets and stories of infidelity with us. Sometimes life presents us with surprises that are impossible to predict. Everything seems familiar and calm, and suddenly, in one moment, as if a lightning bolt in a clear sky, something changes. At first, it's imperceptible, on the edge of perception, but with every second, that feeling intensifies, growing inside until it engulfs your entire being. That's exactly how I felt that evening, when Michael, my husband's father, came to visit us. I am Emily, an ordinary woman living in a small town in Oregon. I am married to James, and we have 2 children to whom we have dedicated all our energy. Our house is situated right by the forest, and sometimes, when I am alone, I feel as though the trees are whispering to each other, discussing something secret and ancient. But, as I recently realized, the real secrets are not hidden in the forest, but much closer, among those we consider to be our loved ones. Michael arrived unexpectedly, though he had informed us of his visit. We were accustomed to his rare visits. He is a person engrossed in his work, employed in another state, but he always finds time to visit us. That evening, I greeted him at the door, feeling a slight unease that was hard to explain. He had always been a reserved, calm person, but at that moment, I sensed something new in his gaze. Something that made me freeze for a moment. After dinner, we sat in the living room. James was talking about work, the children had already gone to bed, and only the fire in the fireplace was a witness to our conversations. I tried not to look at Michael, but I felt his presence with every cell of my body. His gaze seemed like an invisible thread pulling me, and despite the absurdity of this thought, I couldn't shake the feeling that some invisible game was unfolding between us. I tried to focus on James's words, but every time I lifted my eyes, I encountered Michael's gaze. There was something strange, incomprehensible, yet simultaneously magnetic about it. It wasn't just curiosity, it was something more, something that made me ponder what lay behind his reserved smile. The night was deepening outside, and the shadows in the room were growing longer. I could feel the atmosphere changing, filling with a tension I couldn't explain. That evening was different from others, but I couldn't yet understand exactly how. When the conversations dwindled and James suggested we all retire to our rooms, I suddenly felt a strange sense of disappointment. It was absurd, but I caught myself wanting to stay, to continue feeling the strange attraction that had filled the room. But, of course, I couldn't allow myself that. I silently got up and followed my husband, leaving Michael alone with his thoughts. The night was long. I tossed and turned in bed, trying to fall asleep, but my thoughts kept returning to Michael. His gaze, his calmness, none of it left my mind. I could hear his voice in my head, a voice I somehow couldn't forget. I tried to convince myself that it was all just imagination, that I was worked up from fatigue and stress, but it didn't help. Inside me, something was stirring, something I was afraid to name aloud. The next morning, I tried to act normally. James and I had breakfast, discussed plans for the day, but I felt that Michael was watching me, as if trying to decipher my thoughts. It felt like a game where no one had spoken the rules aloud, yet both participants knew it was underway. When James left for work, and the children went to school, I was left alone with Michael. The house was quiet, only the wind outside swaying the trees, creating a sense of coziness and tranquility. I tried to focus on the household chores, but my thoughts kept drifting back to him. I found myself listening for his footsteps, the sounds he made, and at some point, I realized I was waiting for our encounter. He entered the kitchen while I was washing dishes. His presence was so overwhelming that I felt a pang of nervousness in my chest. I didn't dare turn around, but I knew he was standing nearby, and this closeness made my heart race. "Emily!" His voice came unexpectedly, and I flinched. He was as calm as always, but there was a hidden note in his tone that made me catch my breath. I turned around and met his gaze. He was closer than I had expected, and I felt a chill run down my spine. His eyes were full of mystery, as if he knew something I didn't understand. We stared at each other in silence, and in that moment, I realized that something more than just a connection between a father-in-law and a daughter-in-law had developed between us. I wanted to say something, but the words stuck in my throat. We stood so close that I could hear his breathing, and that sensation enveloped me completely. Inside me, a storm was brewing. I understood that something was happening that shouldn't be, but I couldn't stop. Every glance, every gesture from him drew me in, and I knew it wasn't just attraction. It was something else, something that was kindling slowly, like a fire smoldering gradually. Michael turned away first, as if giving me a chance to collect my thoughts, but I knew that this moment would linger in my memory for a long time. I continued with my tasks, but every moment of that day was permeated by his presence, his gazes, his voice. It was like a premonition of a storm that had yet to start, but had already captured all my attention. That day passed, leaving me with the feeling that something in my life had changed. I realized that what was happening was dangerous, but I couldn't resist it. Everything seemed so mundane, yet inside me, an elusive force was growing, gradually taking over me entirely. All day, I tried to find an explanation for my feelings. Cleaning, cooking, household chores, all of it was supposed to distract me. But every time I was alone, my thoughts returned to Michael. I was agitated, but I didn't understand why. It felt as though an invisible net was forming around me, tightening its grip with each passing day. When evening came and James returned from work, I tried to act as usual. We had dinner together, discussing everyday matters. James talked about some work issues, and I tried to listen, but my gaze kept falling on Michael, who also seemed to sense the hidden tension between us. His calmness and silence became something mysterious and intriguing, as if he were waiting for me to make the first move. After dinner, James suggested going for a walk, but feeling tired and overwhelmed, I declined. He shrugged, kissed me on the forehead, and left, leaving me alone with Michael. It was a strange moment when the air in the room became heavy, like before a storm. I didn't know what to say and felt a slight shiver overcoming me. "Emily," Michael broke the silence, his voice calm, but with an undertone of insistence that made me flinch. "You've changed somehow. Is everything all right?" This simple question made me tense up. I couldn't admit to him what I was feeling, as I didn't fully understand it myself. But his words, his concern for my state, were unexpected and, worse, desirable. "Yes, everything is fine," I replied, trying to appear as calm as possible. "I'm just a bit tired." Michael didn't say anything, but his gaze lingered on me longer than usual. In his eyes, I saw questions to which I couldn't find answers. We fell back into silence, but this silence didn't feel awkward. Rather, it was filled with hidden tension, as if we were both waiting for something, but hesitating to make the first move. At some point, it became unbearable for me to be in the same room with him. I felt my heart start to race, and my thoughts became tangled. I got up from the sofa, trying not to look at Michael, and headed towards the door. "I'm going to get some fresh air," I said, not looking back. He didn't reply, and I went outside, feeling the night air envelop me with its coolness. The forest around our house stood quiet and calm, with only a gentle breeze rustling the leaves. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing heart, and slowly walked along the path leading deeper into the forest. I needed to think, to understand what was happening to me. This man, my husband's father, a man who had always seemed cold and distant, why was I now feeling something towards him that I couldn't explain? These thoughts tormented me, but they brought no clarity. I walked further into the forest, trying to sort out my thoughts. The path led me to a small pond, whose existence I had almost forgotten. The water was dark and still, reflecting the night sky with its few stars. I sat down on a bench by the water, listening to the wind playing with the branches of the trees. In this solitude, I finally managed to calm down. I closed my eyes and allowed myself to forget about Michael, James, and all my worries for a moment. But the calm was short-lived. At some point, I heard footsteps behind me and tensed immediately. Opening my eyes, I saw a figure approaching. It was Michael. He came closer and sat down next to me on the bench without saying a word. His presence again made me nervous, but at the same time, I felt something new igniting within me, a spark that I couldn't extinguish. We sat in silence, side by side. The silence around us was complete, but in that silence, I felt an invisible force flowing between us. It was like an electric current running across my skin, making my heart beat faster. Inside me, two feelings struggled, an urge to leave and a fear of what might happen if I stayed. Michael slowly turned his head and looked at me. In his eyes, I saw the same thing I felt myself: attraction, passion that he was hiding, but had become too strong to ignore. He didn't say a word, but that look spoke more than any words could. I couldn't look away, couldn't leave. We were like two magnets drawn to each other, despite all obstacles. I felt my breathing quicken, and I was afraid he would hear how fast my heart was beating. At that moment, I felt frightened. Frightened that I could no longer control myself, that the attraction to this man had become too strong. I knew that if I stayed here any longer, I wouldn't be able to resist anymore. But Michael, sensing my anxiety, broke the connection first. He turned his gaze and looked at the dark surface of the pond. I felt the tension between us begin to dissipate, but along with it came disappointment. I wanted him to make the first move, for the spark we both felt to ignite. But he might have understood that it was too dangerous. "It's very peaceful here," he finally said, his voice calm and even again, as if nothing had happened. "Yes," I nodded, trying to regain control. "It's a good place to think." He looked at me again, and I realized that this moment was just the beginning of something more. Despite everything I felt, despite all the danger, I knew that this evening was only the first spark in the flame that would inevitably ignite. We stayed there for a while longer until the night air began to chill us. Finally, I got up, and Michael did the same. We walked back to the house in silence, where our old lives awaited us, but I knew that this night had changed everything. When we returned, James was already asleep. I climbed into bed, feeling the cold night air from the forest still tickling my skin. I closed my eyes, but sleep did not come. I lay there, listening to James's quiet breathing, and thought about how everything would soon change. This night had marked the beginning of something new, something dangerous, but I could not avoid it. My life would never be the same, and I could no longer stop what had begun. The next morning, I woke up with the feeling that the night in the forest was not a dream, but a reality that was gradually taking over my life. Everything around me seemed strangely familiar, but also changed. I couldn't get rid of thoughts about Michael, about how we had sat by the pond, surrounded by silence and hidden passion. His image haunted me, even as I tried to focus on ordinary tasks. James had left for work early in the morning, and once again, I was alone in the house with Michael. The day began as usual. The kids went off to school, I took care of the cleaning, but everything around seemed painted in new, more vivid colors. In every step Michael took around the house, in every glance he cast, I felt something I had never noticed before. It was like an electric charge in the air that couldn't be ignored. All day, I tried to avoid encountering him. I felt that if we were alone again, what had happened by the pond would repeat itself, and I wouldn't be able to resist any longer. Yet, I still heard his footsteps in the neighboring rooms, and that feeling continued to envelop me like a suffocating fog. As evening approached, with the sun already setting, I heard his voice calling me from the living room. It was calm, as if nothing had happened, but I felt it was merely a facade concealing something much deeper. I entered the room, trying to appear confident, but inside I was trembling. Michael stood by the window, looking out at the golden evening sky. I noticed him slightly turn his head towards me, catching the sound of my approaching steps. "Emily?" he said quietly, as if testing my reaction to the sound of his voice. "Yes?" I responded, trying to keep my voice steady, though I knew it was becoming increasingly difficult. He didn't answer right away, and I moved closer, unable to resist the unknown attraction. The room was filled with silence, and only the faint wind outside reminded us that the world beyond our home continued to move. I found myself next to him, closer than I had intended, and felt the air between us growing dense and palpable. Michael slowly turned to face me, and his eyes met mine. At that moment, I realized that I could no longer run away. A fire was igniting between us that couldn't be extinguished. His gaze was so intense that I felt a shiver run through my body. "Why are you avoiding me?" he asked softly, as if knowing the answer, but wanting to hear it from me. I took a deep breath, trying to gather my thoughts, but they scattered like sand through my fingers. I couldn't lie to him, couldn't pretend that everything was fine. "Because I'm afraid," I admitted, feeling my throat dry up. Michael nodded slowly, as if understanding what I meant. He took a step towards me, and I felt his hand touch mine. The touch was light, almost weightless, but it stirred a storm of emotions within me. I looked up, meeting his gaze, and realized that I could no longer resist. Michael moved closer, his breath brushing against my skin, and I couldn't look away. At that moment, there was only a thin line between us that was about to disappear. I didn't know how it would all end, but I knew one thing. I wanted it. I wanted him. He lifted his hand and gently caressed my cheek. The motion was so tender that I felt goosebumps running across my skin. My heart pounded so hard that I was afraid he might hear it. I couldn't hold back this feeling any longer. It had engulfed me completely. Michael leaned in closer, and time seemed to stop. I saw his eyes darken with passion as his lips slowly approached mine. I knew I should step back, stop this, but instead, I took a step forward, feeling his hand tighten around my face. And finally, his lips touched mine. It was more than just a kiss. It was a release from all the constraints, all the rules and prohibitions. His lips were soft and warm, and this kiss evoked such strong feelings in me that I had never experienced before. Everything inside me screamed that this was wrong, that I was making a huge mistake, but at that moment, I couldn't stop. Michael pulled me closer, and I felt his arms wrapping around me, as if trying to keep me from falling into the abyss I had thrown myself into. The kiss was long and deep, full of the passion that had been hidden in both of us for so long. I responded with the same intensity with which he was kissing me, and I felt his hands moving across my body, stirring a wave of desire within me. I knew it was wrong. I knew this moment would change everything, but at that moment, I couldn't think of anything else but how much I wanted this man who stood before me. When we finally broke apart, both of us breathing heavily, I couldn't believe what had just happened. My lips still burned from his kiss, and my heart raced as if I had run a marathon. We looked at each other, trying to grasp what we had just done. "Emily," Michael whispered, his voice filled with an uncertainty I had never heard before. "We shouldn't." But I didn't let him finish. I knew he was right, but I couldn't let this moment end like this. I pulled him to me again, and our lips met once more, this time with even greater passion. This kiss was longer, hotter, and I felt his arms embracing me again, leaving me no chance to escape. We couldn't stop, even if we wanted to. This moment was what we had both been waiting for, but were afraid to admit to ourselves. I knew this kiss would change everything, but I couldn't stop. I wanted him more than ever. Finally, when we pulled away from each other, I felt the world collapse around us. I realized that our lives would never be the same. This kiss had become a point of no return, and I didn't know where it would lead us. But I was sure of one thing: we could no longer go back. Michael slowly released me, his eyes still filled with passion, but also showing concern. I felt the tension between us, which could no longer be ignored. We both understood that we had made a huge mistake, but that knowledge couldn't stop what had begun. "We need to think," he said, and I nodded, not knowing what to say in response. We stood there in that room, filled with silence and tension, and I knew that this moment had changed everything. After our lips finally parted, a silence filled the air, laden with tension and unspoken words. I stood across from Michael, trying to grasp what had just happened. Everything that once seemed stable and predictable had turned into chaos that I didn't know how to handle. Michael took a step back, as if creating an invisible barrier between us. I saw his eyes darting around, and I understood that he, like me, felt the guilt of what had transpired, yet couldn't deny the pull between us. "We need to talk," he finally said, his voice soft but firm. "This shouldn't have happened, we both know that." I nodded, feeling a tightening pain inside. He was right. This kiss shouldn't have happened, but it did. And now we both had to live with that knowledge. I couldn't figure out how to go on, pretending everything was normal, as if nothing had happened between us. "I know," I replied, trying to keep my emotions under control. "But what now?" He looked at me, and I saw in his eyes the same anguish tearing me apart. He wanted to answer, but at that moment, we heard the front door open, and our hearts froze. It was James. He had returned earlier than I expected. I felt a cold sweat cover my body and tried to appear as calm as possible. Michael immediately changed his expression, regaining his former composure. "Emily, I'm home!" James's voice called out as he headed toward us in the living room. Michael nodded at me, as if signaling that the conversation was over, and took a step aside to leave. I remained where I was, feeling a storm of fear and guilt brewing inside. James entered the room, and I met his gaze, trying to hide all my emotions. "Hi, darling," he said, coming over to me and kissing me on the cheek. "Is everything okay?" I nodded, unable to respond with words. My heart was still pounding, and I feared that James might sense something was wrong. But he seemed to notice nothing suspicious. He was too absorbed in his thoughts and stories about his day at work. Michael stayed in the room for a few more minutes, listening to James's conversation, but soon excused himself, saying he needed some time alone. I watched him leave, feeling the pain and fear tighten within me. What would happen next? The evening passed in a strange atmosphere. I tried to act as usual, but I kept finding my thoughts drifting back to Michael. James was unaware and seemed pleased that the family was together again. We watched a movie, had dinner, and talked about daily matters. But inside me, a storm raged. When night fell and we went to bed, I couldn't sleep. Lying next to James, I felt suffocated by guilt. I understood that my actions were unforgivable, that I had betrayed his trust, but I couldn't get rid of the image of Michael, his kiss, his touch. It was like poison that had seeped into my blood and wouldn't let me rest. I got out of bed and, trying not to wake James, left the bedroom. I needed to be alone, to try to make sense of what had happened. I went out to the porch, where the night air was cool and fresh. Looking up at the dark sky, I tried to find answers to my questions, but there were none. Inside me was an emptiness I didn't know how to fill. Outside, there was silence, but in that silence, I heard the echo of my thoughts. I understood that our kiss couldn't remain without consequences. We had crossed a line that couldn't be ignored. Now I had to decide how to live with this knowledge. I didn't know how much time had passed, but suddenly I felt someone touch my shoulder. Turning around, I saw Michael. He stood nearby, his face tense and his eyes filled with worry. "Emily, we need to talk," he said quietly, as if afraid of breaking the silence of the night. I nodded, realizing that avoiding this conversation was no longer an option. We walked into the garden, where the dark silhouettes of trees concealed us from prying eyes. Michael stopped, looked at me, and I felt my heart start pounding again. "This shouldn't have happened," he said, his voice trembling with tension. "But I can't pretend there's nothing between us. I don't know what to do, Emily. But I know one thing. We can't continue as if nothing has changed." These words hit me like a blow. I knew he was right, but I couldn't find the words. All I could do was look at him and try to figure out what to do next. We were on the edge of a precipice, and every step we took could be our last. "What are we going to do?" I finally asked, feeling fear overwhelm me. Michael took a step towards me, and I felt his hand touch mine again. The touch was warm, but in it, I sensed the same uncertainty that tormented me inside. "I don't know," he whispered, his voice full of pain. "But I know one thing. I can't lose you. But I also can't betray James. We need to decide how to proceed." I didn't know what to say. We both understood that what we had done would change everything. We could either sever the ties that bound us or continue down a path that had already become inevitable. But in any case, the decision needed to be made thoughtfully. We stood silently in the garden, surrounded by the night's quiet. I felt a churn of emotions inside me, but couldn't find the words to express what was happening in my soul. This moment was the most important in my life, and I knew that any decision we made would have consequences. "We can't go back," I said quietly, finally finding my voice. "But I don't know how to move forward." Michael nodded, agreeing with me. We were both trapped in a situation with no easy exit. But at that moment, I realized I could no longer live without this person standing before me. Despite all the obstacles, despite all the pain, I knew our connection was stronger than any rules and prohibitions. "We'll find a way," Michael finally said, his voice filled with resolve. "We need to be honest with each other and with ourselves." I nodded, feeling his words give me strength. We didn't know how it would all end, but at that moment, I realized I was ready to walk this path, no matter how difficult it might be. We returned to the house without saying another word, but inside, I felt that this conversation had changed everything. Now we were no longer just a father-in-law and daughter-in-law. We had become something more, something that could no longer be stopped. The next morning, I woke with a heavy burden on my shoulders. Everything that had happened in the last few days, every tense moment with Michael, the kisses, and the inevitable conversations, had become so real and palpable that I could no longer ignore my feelings. James had left for work early again, leaving Michael and me alone in the house. The sensation of his proximity, the knowledge that we were alone, and what had happened between us had become a barrier we could no longer ignore. After breakfast, I cleaned the kitchen, trying to distract myself from my thoughts, but they kept returning like persistent flies, not letting me find peace. Michael was restless too. I could hear his footsteps in the next room, feel his gaze on me every time he passed by. The tension built up with each passing minute until I felt I couldn't endure it any longer. At some point, I realized I had to make the first move. I had to finally let my feelings out, which I had suppressed for so long. I threw the dishcloth into the sink and headed to the living room, where Michael sat on the couch, lost in his thoughts. He looked up as I entered, and I saw the same fire burning in his eyes that was igniting mine. Without saying a word, I moved closer to him, feeling my heart race faster. We were silent, but our gazes spoke more than any words could. At that moment, I understood that I could no longer fight this attraction. It had become stronger than me, and I saw that Michael felt the same way. He stood up, and I stepped towards him. We were so close that our breaths mingled into one. I felt his hand rest on my shoulder, and at that moment, the world around us vanished. There were no more rules, no more prohibitions. There was only the passion, the fire that burned between us with every moment. Michael pulled me closer, and our lips met again, but this time there was no caution or doubt. It was a kiss full of passion, a desire we could no longer hide. I responded with the same intensity, feeling all my internal barriers crumble under the force of this feeling. His hands explored my body, and I felt a wave of warmth engulf me. He kissed me as if it were the last time our lips could meet, and I surrendered to that moment completely, forgetting everything else in the world. We both knew that this moment was inevitable, that we had long crossed a line with no return. I felt his hands starting to remove my clothes, and I didn't resist. This moment was only ours, and I knew that nothing in the world could stop us. Michael lifted me into his arms, and I wrapped my arms around his neck, feeling him carry me down the hallway to the bedroom. The journey to the room seemed endlessly long, yet at the same time, I felt my body burning with desire. I couldn't wait for our bodies to merge, for us to finally unleash what we had hidden for so long. When we reached the bedroom, Michael gently laid me on the bed and hovered over me. His eyes burned with passion, and I saw that at this moment, he was ready to give me everything he had. I ran my hand over his face, feeling every contour, every curve, and our kiss deepened, growing hotter. He lowered himself onto me, his lips trailing hot paths across my body. I closed my eyes, surrendering to the sensations, feeling every nerve in my body come alive under his touch. I could no longer hold back my feelings. They burst forth like a stream that couldn't be stopped. Michael was gentle, but there was a strength in his movements that only heightened my desire. His hands glided over my body, exploring it as if for the first time, and every kiss, every touch made me forget everything in the world. I felt him slowly rise up my body, his lips moving upward until they met mine again. It was only this moment, this sensation of unity that overshadowed everything. We moved together as one, and every breath, every moan was filled with the passion that burned inside us. I felt his arms tightening around me, his body moving in a rhythm that quickened with each passing moment. At that instant, I was ready to give him everything I had, and I felt him doing the same. We were like two flames, merging together and burning ever brighter. I couldn't hold back my feelings, and at one point, everything around us exploded in bright colors. It was like a fireworks display, bursting across the sky, leaving only the dark night behind. I felt Michael arch his head back, and in that moment, we both reached a peak that was no longer attainable. When it was over, we lay side by side, breathing heavily, and I felt my heart beating in sync with his. We were bound by something that could no longer be broken. This moment was everything we had longed for, and I knew that everything had changed now. We were silent, but there was no awkwardness in the silence. It was filled with the closeness that had come to us at that moment. I turned to Michael, stroked his face, and met his gaze. In his eyes, I saw not only passion, but something more. A connection that had become unbreakable for both of us. "We can't hide this anymore," I said softly, feeling my words echo in the silence of the room. Michael nodded, and I understood that he felt the same way. We could no longer go back. This moment was the beginning of something new for both of us, something that could no longer be ignored. We knew that difficult decisions and consequences awaited us, but at that moment, it didn't matter. We were together, and that was the most important thing. Several days had passed since the moment when Michael and I had become one in both body and soul. That moment had been a pinnacle for both of us, a culmination of everything we had been moving towards, but it also marked the beginning of a new reality in which we now had to live. I understood that this act had changed everything. There would no longer be the same clarity and peace between us. We continued to live in the same house, but now everything was different. James suspected nothing, and this only intensified the tension that surrounded us. Every moment spent with him felt false to me, as if I were playing a role in a play I hadn't chosen. But the real tension arose when Michael and I were alone together. These moments were filled not only with passion, but also with danger. We both knew that our connection couldn't remain hidden forever, that at some point, we would have to make a choice that would change our lives forever. But for now, we tried to savor every minute we spent together, as if they were the last moments of our happiness. On one of those nights, when the house had sunk into silence and James had long since fallen asleep, I once again stepped out onto the porch to be alone with my thoughts. The night air was cool, and I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. My thoughts kept returning to Michael, to how we had been together, and to what awaited us in the future. I felt a fire burning inside me that couldn't be extinguished. It wasn't just passion. It was something more, something that consumed me entirely. I knew that I loved Michael, but I also understood that this love carried with it many problems and complications. I stood there, lost in thought, when suddenly I heard footsteps behind me. It was Michael. He came up to me, and I felt his hand touch my shoulder. The touch was so familiar and yet so new that I involuntarily shivered. I turned to him, and in his eyes, I saw the same mixture of passion and anxiety that I felt myself. "We can't keep going like this," he said quietly, as if reading my thoughts. "It's becoming too dangerous, Emily. We need to make a decision." I knew he was right. We could no longer live in this world of secret meetings and hidden feelings. We needed to make a choice, and it had to be a thoughtful one. "What do you suggest?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, though inside, everything was boiling. Michael was silent for a few seconds, considering his response. I could see him struggling with himself, trying to find a way out of this situation, but his eyes betrayed the pain he was hiding. "I don't know," he finally said, "but I can't stand to see you suffer anymore. We need to decide what to do next. Maybe we should tell James the truth?" His words struck me like lightning. I hadn't expected him to suggest such a course of action, but I understood that there was logic in it. We couldn't hide forever. But how could I admit to James what had happened? How would he react? These thoughts swirled in my mind, and I couldn't find an answer. "It will destroy everything," I whispered, feeling a chill run through my body. "Are you sure this is the right path?" Michael stepped closer to me, his hand sliding down my cheek, and I felt his warmth fill me. "I don't know," he admitted honestly, and I could hear the pain in his voice. "But I know one thing. I can't live in this lie anymore. You mean too much to me. I'm willing to do anything to be with you, Emily." His words made me think. I knew he was telling the truth, but I also knew that the decision we made would change everything. We would no longer be able to go back to our previous life. But maybe that wasn't necessary? We stood there, in the silence of the night, and I felt the tension around us thickening. I knew that this moment had become a turning point in our lives. There was no way back now. "I don't want to hide anymore either," I finally said, making my decision. "But we need to be careful. Give me some time to think everything over." Michael nodded, understanding that I wasn't asking to back down, but to prepare for what lay ahead. He embraced me, and I felt his arms wrapped tightly around me, as if protecting me from the entire world. In that moment, I knew I was ready to do anything to be with him, despite all the consequences. In the following days, I tried to find a way to tell James the truth, but every time I attempted to start the conversation, something held me back. It was like a heavy burden that wouldn't allow me to breathe freely. I knew I had to do it, but I didn't know how. Michael felt the tension too, but he tried not to pressure me. We continued our secret meetings, but now there was more sadness than joy in them. We both knew that the moment would soon come when we would have to make a decision that would change everything. One day, when the house was empty and James had left on business, Michael came to me. He was calm, but in his eyes, I saw a determination I hadn't noticed before. He approached me and without saying a word, took my hand, leading me to the bedroom. I knew what he wanted. And at that moment, I wanted it too. We could no longer wait, could no longer hide our feelings. I followed him, feeling the fire of passion ignite within me. This was our moment, and we couldn't let it slip away. Michael closed the bedroom door behind us, and I felt the tension melt away in the air. He embraced me, and our lips met again in a kiss. But this time, it wasn't just desire, but also a resolve to be together, despite everything. We knew that this moment was the beginning of something new, and we could no longer ignore it. As we lay together on the bed, I felt his hands begin to remove my clothes, and I surrendered completely to this feeling. We were together as one, and every moment was filled with passion and love. It was more than just physical attraction. It was the unity of two souls that had finally found each other. Michael's birthday was planned as a quiet and cozy evening with just the three of us in our home, which had become both a refuge and a place where the darkest secrets were hidden. From the very morning, I felt strange, as if something inevitable was approaching, but I couldn't allow myself to dwell on it. I had to focus on my plan. I decided to give Michael a special gift. It had to be more than just a gesture. It had to express all the feelings I had been hiding for so long. The idea came to me suddenly, and I couldn't let it go. I went to the store to find the perfect outfit that would convey all the passion and excitement that were burning inside me. The store was full of seductive costumes, but my eyes immediately fell on one, a latex outfit with a very short skirt and a mask. It was perfect. I knew that Michael would understand everything without words when he saw me in this outfit. I bought it, hid it in my closet, and wrote a short note for Michael with instructions on when and where to meet. I slipped the note into his bag, hoping he would find it at the right moment. In the evening, we gathered around the table to celebrate the birthday. James was in a good mood, joking, telling stories, as always, unaware of what was hidden behind it all. Michael also looked calm, but I could see the same spark in his eyes that I had. It was our secret, hidden from everyone. The dinner went smoothly, and it seemed that everything was going according to plan. But everything changed when James suddenly remembered that he needed some important documents that he had recently put in Michael's bag. It was unexpected, but I didn't give it much thought. James went to another room to search for the documents, and I continued clearing the table, lost in my thoughts. A few minutes later, he returned and said, "You know, I need to leave urgently for the night," he said, surprisingly calmly. "We'll have to postpone our conversation until tomorrow." His words sounded like a sentence, but I couldn't argue. He quickly packed up, kissed me on the cheek, and left, leaving me alone with Michael. I didn't understand what was happening, but I knew one thing: something terrible was ahead of us. After he left, I felt the tension inside me reach its peak. I knew that James had something planned, but I couldn't predict what it was. Michael and I continued the evening, but in every glance he gave me, I saw the same anxiety. Later, when the house fell silent, I put on the costume I had prepared, and Michael and I headed to the bedroom. This was our moment, and I knew I had to act now, while we had the chance. When I entered the bedroom, Michael was already waiting for me. His eyes lit up when he saw me in the costume. I began to dance, feeling the passion boiling inside me. It was like a release, an expression of everything we felt for each other. But at that moment, the bedroom door suddenly swung open, and I froze. James stood in the doorway, his face a mixture of rage and pain. He said nothing, just watched what was unfolding before his eyes. "What is going on here?" His voice was low and threatening. Michael jumped off the bed, his face darkening as he realized there was nothing left to hide. "You betrayed me!" James growled, launching himself at Michael with his fists. "You! My father!" The blows came with a fury I had never seen in James before. Michael defended himself, but I could see that he didn't want to hurt his son. This fight was full of pain and disappointment, and I knew it would mark the end of everything we knew. Finally, James pushed Michael so hard that he fell to the floor. I rushed to help him, but James stopped me, his eyes burning with hatred. "Get out, both of you," he said with chilling calm. "I never want to see you again. Ever." I felt everything inside me tearing apart, but I knew we had no choice. Michael and I left the house without saying a word, leaving behind everything that had once been dear to us. We left in the dead of night, when silence blanketed the house like a shroud, concealing all traces of what had transpired. I don't remember how we packed, or what I said to Michael. Everything blurred into a single, smeared stain, as if these events were happening not to me, but to someone else. We were like two ghosts, drifting away from a shattered world, trying to escape what could no longer be repaired. Michael drove in silence, his face emotionless, eyes fixed straight ahead. I tried to find some expression in his eyes, a hint of what was going on inside him, but I found only a cold, terrifying emptiness. We didn't speak, didn't exchange glances, didn't touch each other. It seemed that words were unnecessary, redundant at that moment. We both understood that everything had changed forever, and that we had lost everything: family, home, peace. All that remained were memories and the bitterness that filled every cell of our being, poisoning the last remnants of what was still alive within us. We drove for a long time, as if trying to get as far away as possible from what had happened. But despite the distance, the weight of the events continued to hang over us, pressing down with unbearable force. At some point, I realized that this journey had become a symbol of our flight, not only from James, but from each other as well. We both knew that there would no longer be the closeness between us that we had once felt. We stopped at a small motel on the outskirts of town, far from anything that could remind us of the past. The place was so nondescript and plain that I could barely distinguish it in the dim light. Michael silently got out of the car and headed to the registration desk. I followed him, feeling like an empty shell, devoid of all feelings except a deep, aching sorrow. We checked in and went up to our room, which was just as lifeless as the building itself. It was merely a refuge for one night, a shelter where we could hide from the world, but not from ourselves. The night passed in silence. We lay on opposite sides of the bed, not daring to approach each other. I stared at the ceiling, trying to comprehend what had happened, but everything felt unreal, like a nightmare from which I couldn't wake up. We were standing at the edge of an abyss, and I had no idea what awaited us next. I closed my eyes, trying to drift off, but sleep wouldn't come. The events of the past few days played over and over in my mind, each one like a sharp knife stabbing into my heart. I recalled our last conversation with James, his words full of hatred and pain. I knew I had destroyed his life, but realizing this brought no relief. It was a guilt I would have to live with, and I didn't know how to bear the burden. In the morning, as the first rays of sunlight filtered through the thin curtains, Michael said he had to leave for business and left me in the room. I heard his footsteps fade away behind the door and felt as though the last thread connecting us was slipping away with him. I sat on the edge of the bed, surrounded by silence, unsure of what to do next. Our future was shrouded in fog, and I saw nothing in it but emptiness. For several days, I lived in that room, as if in a state of oblivion. I didn't go outside, didn't speak to anyone. My life had shrunk to four walls, where I tried to hide from reality, but every second of solitude only intensified my pain. I couldn't shake the image of James, his eyes filled with disappointment and anger. I knew he would never forgive me, and that realization tore me apart. On the third day, the divorce papers arrived. I knew James would file for divorce, but I didn't expect it to happen so quickly. He acted decisively, as if wanting to sever all ties as soon as possible, leaving no room for doubt or regret. The papers contained nothing personal, just dry, legal terms, cold and emotionless. But with them came a letter, written in his hand. "Emily, you no longer exist to me. I don't want to see you or him ever again. We are finished. Forget about me, as I will forget about you." Those words hit me harder than anything that had happened before. I felt something break inside my chest and realized that James had truly vanished from my life forever. This was the end, final and irreversible. Now I was completely alone, stripped of everything that had once been dear to me. Michael returned that evening, but the closeness that had once bound us was gone. He was distant, lost in his own thoughts, and I didn't dare ask questions. I knew he felt the same emptiness that I did, but we were too broken to support each other. We lived together, but each of us was consumed by our own suffering. Days passed, and I began to notice that Michael was leaving more and more often, leaving me alone. He didn't say where he was going, and I didn't ask. A wall was growing between us, separating us further and further. I knew our relationship was destroyed, but I couldn't accept that I had lost him too. Each day became a mirror of the last. I wandered around the room like a ghost, unable to find peace. I had nowhere to go, and no one to turn to for comfort. Michael and I had stopped being the people who once loved each other. We had become strangers, bound only by shared pain and guilt. I began to realize that this was only a temporary refuge, and that sooner or later, Michael would leave. He couldn't stay with me forever, couldn't continue living in this nightmare. I saw him becoming more and more distant, and I understood that soon our paths would part for good. The night I finally accepted this realization, I felt something break inside me. I had lost everything that had been dear to me: family, home, love. Now I was left alone, with only emptiness ahead. After I received the divorce papers, something began to settle between Michael and me, something I could only describe as an irreversible loss. It was like a thick fog slowly enveloping us both, cutting off the path back to the passion and closeness that once bound us together. With each passing day, our connection grew more fragile, like thin ice on the verge of cracking and shattering into tiny shards. We continued to live in the same motel that had become our temporary refuge, but now this place held nothing but coldness and emptiness. Michael increasingly left for his business, leaving me alone. I understood that these business trips were nothing more than his attempts to escape from reality, from the responsibility he could no longer bear. Each time, his absences grew longer. He returned late, tired and irritable, not even trying to hide his distant behavior. An invisible wall stood between us, growing higher and more insurmountable with each passing day. We no longer spoke of the future, nor did we share our thoughts or feelings. The bond that once seemed so strong and indestructible was slowly fading away. I tried to understand what was happening to Michael, but he wouldn't let me get close. His silence became unbearable for me. I felt myself sinking deeper into loneliness, as if being swallowed by a darkness from which there was no escape. Sometimes I found myself waiting for his return, hoping for some sign that there was still a spark between us. But each time he returned more withdrawn, and I realized that these hopes were in vain. One evening, when Michael had left again, I sat alone in the room, surrounded by a silence that pressed on me from all sides. I could no longer stay in this place, could no longer bear the cold and emptiness. I went outside, wishing to feel fresh air for just a moment, but even there, among the trees and the rustling of the wind, I found no solace. All I felt was a deep, all-consuming emptiness. When I returned to the room, I was met by nothingness. Michael had not returned. I sat on the bed, waiting for him, but time passed, and the hours dragged on in agonizing anticipation. I began to understand that he was never coming back. This realization hit me like a blow to the heart. I had lost him, just as I had lost everything else. Several days passed, and Michael never returned. In his absence, the room began to feel like a cage from which I couldn't escape. I lived in a state of waiting, listening intently to the sounds outside the door, hoping to hear his footsteps. But no footsteps came, and with each passing day, hope melted away like snow in the sun. On one of those days, I decided to go outside and try to find Michael. I went to all the places where we had been together, but found not a single trace of him. He had vanished, leaving me in this faceless world filled only with the ghosts of the past. When I returned to the motel, I saw a letter on the table. His words, written in a neat and confident hand, delivered the final blow to me. "Emily, I'm sorry. I can't continue this. Our paths have diverged. I can't be with you. Everything that was between us is now in the past. Goodbye." I stared at the letter, unable to believe my eyes. This was the end I had feared, but it had come nonetheless. I was alone, completely and irrevocably. All the dreams, hopes, and plans, everything had been destroyed in an instant. All I could do was accept this reality. The room I stayed in now felt foreign to me. I could no longer stay here, could no longer live among memories that only caused pain. I packed my things, the ones that reminded me of the past, and left the motel without looking back. I walked the streets, not knowing where to go. The world around me felt as empty and cold as I did. I had lost everything that once mattered, and now all I could do was keep moving forward, wherever my steps might take me. Several days passed before I found a small apartment on the other side of town. I rented it, trying to start a new life, but every morning I woke up with a sense of loss. The past haunted me, giving me no peace. I was like a ghost, wandering in a world that no longer felt like home. I knew that a long road lay ahead of me, a road to accepting what had happened, a road to finding myself in this new world. I had lost so much, but I still had to find the strength to keep going. Weeks passed, but the pain didn't subside. Each day felt like an endless nightmare from which there was no waking. I woke up in the mornings with a sense of emptiness, and that feeling never left me until the evening. I felt as if I was trapped in a fog, unable to see the light that once illuminated my path. After Michael left, I stayed in the small apartment I had rented in another part of the city. The apartment was tiny, almost cramped, but to me, it felt too spacious. There was nothing in it that reminded me of my past life, of the home I had destroyed with my own hands. It was a new beginning, but every day spent there brought new torments. I thought a lot about what I had done. My entire life had turned into an endless cycle of regret and self-reproach. I had shattered my family, betrayed the person who loved me more than anything, and destroyed a relationship that should have been sacred. I couldn't shake the feeling of guilt that followed me like a shadow. Sometimes I would sit on the bed and try to imagine how my life might have turned out if I had made different choices. If I had stopped at the very beginning. If I had resisted my desires. If I had remained faithful to James. But those thoughts were futile. Reality was what it was, and I couldn't change it. Every time I went outside, I felt how the world around me had changed. People passed by without paying attention to me, and I realized that I no longer belonged to this world. I was a stranger in my own life, stripped of the meaning that had once been so important to me. I tried to find a job to distract myself from my thoughts, but even that didn't bring me any relief. Every morning, I would go out looking for work, but I couldn't hold on to any position. Everything seemed meaningless to me, and I couldn't find the strength to continue. Loneliness and despair became my constant companions. One evening, after a long day of searching, something inside me broke. I sat on the floor, hugging my knees, and began to cry. Tears streamed down my cheeks, and I couldn't stop them. It was like a flood washing away all my efforts to stay afloat. I cried for a long time, trying to release all my feelings, but it brought no relief. I realized that trying to start a new life wasn't as easy as I had thought. All my attempts to build something new were shattered against the wall of regret and guilt. I couldn't forgive myself for what I had done. I had destroyed not only my own life, but also the lives of those who were dear to me. And that realization was unbearable. At night, I woke up again from nightmares. In my dreams, images of James and Michael appeared, their faces filled with pain and disappointment. I saw them turning away from me, walking away, leaving me alone in the darkness. These dreams were so real that I woke up screaming, feeling my heart tighten with fear and longing. One day, sitting alone in my apartment, I realized that I needed to change something. I could no longer live in this state. I had to find a way to let go of the past, accept my mistakes, and move forward. But that was easier said than done. I started by deciding to seek help. I made an appointment with a therapist, hoping it would help me understand my feelings and find the strength to keep living. The first sessions were difficult. I couldn't talk about what had happened without feeling a wave of pain rise in my chest. But gradually, step by step, I began to open up. I talked about my fears, about how I had lost everything, about how hard it was for me to live with this burden on my soul. The therapist helped me understand that I couldn't change the past, but I could learn to live with its consequences. She showed me that my desire to start a new life was the first step toward healing. But to move forward, I had to learn to forgive myself, even if that seemed impossible. The process was long and painful. I relived my mistakes over and over, trying to find the strength within to forgive myself for what I had done. There were days when I felt ready to give up, when I thought I didn't have the strength to continue. But there were also moments when I felt a glimmer of hope, like a small ray of light in the darkness. Over time, I began to notice changes. My pain didn't disappear, but it became less sharp. I began to understand that my past didn't have to define my entire future. I could learn from my mistakes and use that experience to become stronger. It wasn't easy, and the road to healing was long, but I knew I had to keep moving forward. Every day, I took small steps toward a new life. I found a job in a small cafe where no one knew about my past. This place became a refuge for me, where I could forget about my problems, even if just for a few hours. I started finding joy in the little things, in the morning light, in the smell of freshly brewed coffee, in the smiles of the customers. These were small moments, but they helped me keep going. I realized that I couldn't fix what had happened, but I could try to make my life better. I began to look for the strength not just to live, but to start trusting people again, to open myself up to new experiences. It wasn't easy, but with each passing day, I felt something inside me changing. At some point, I realized that the journey to a new life didn't have to be quick. It was a slow, gradual process, and it required patience and willpower. I learned to appreciate each moment, even if it was filled with pain. I understood that it's not just about how we live, but how we learn to live with what we've done. In the end, I began to find peace within myself. I accepted my mistakes and found the strength to move on. The past was still a part of me, but it no longer defined my entire life. I started to see the light at the end of the tunnel, and that light gave me hope for a better future. Mistakes are a part of human nature. We all make them, and sometimes the consequences can be devastating. I made a mistake that cost me everything. My desire to follow my passions, neglecting what truly mattered, led to the loss of everything I loved. I wanted more, but in the pursuit of that, I forgot about what I already had. I betrayed those who were dear to me and destroyed my life with my own hands. Now, looking back, I realized that my mistake wasn't in loving, but in allowing myself to lose control of my life. My advice to you is to cherish what you have. Don't let your desires blind you to the point where you stop seeing what truly matters. Passion is a powerful force, but if it leads you down the wrong path, its consequences can be terrible. If I could change anything, I would choose a different path, but I can't go back in time, and all I can do now is learn from my mistakes. I hope my story serves as a lesson for you. Don't make the same mistakes I did. Protect what you have, and don't let your desires destroy everything.